76% of Americans have no financial plan whatsoever. Record high credit card debt, record high, bankruptcies, just all these metrics that are really painting a horrible picture of the state of finance for consumers.
What's up, guys? Chris Hansen here. Due to popular demand, we are moving the podcast away from solely solopreneurs, and we're focusing on early stage entrepreneurs and startups in general. So today we've got Dan and Rustin from Coast. It's a financial app, a SaaS out there. They actually did it all the way with NoCode Bubble. So it's going to be interesting to people who are into those no-code solutions. Obviously, a part of our business templates on Notion, and they're going to participate in a Discord channel associated with that. If you guys are interested, please join the Discord. There is no one on there right now but me and a few other people. But I promise you, if you join, I will talk to you personally. I will coach you through your business problems, and you will get early access to some of the business templates. The engagement is kind of low right now, obviously, but I guarantee you're going to wish you joined in the future when it's busy and you could have been the early people involved in the channels and the community building. So enjoy this episode and we'll go from there. Podcast here, interesting kind of episode. I've got two co-founders here, so we're sort of moving away from the solopreneur theme and just really focusing on early stage entrepreneurs in general. We had like just a bunch of solopreneurs on, like the last 5 episodes. So, but in any case, Rustin and Dan, they've got a company called Coast. I think it's pretty interesting. We also haven't had anybody in kind of the financial space or FinTech in general, I guess, if you want to call it that. So I think we're going to be talking a lot about, particularly their industry, all the changes with crypto and stuff that's going on there, but also just like working together and kind of how that sort of dynamic works. Do you guys want to just give a quick intro to the audience, kind of one by one, Rustin and Dan there, and what you do for the business, and maybe a little bit of your background so they have some context?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'll start. My name is Rustin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Coast. My background is predominantly in sales, biz dev, marketing, and operations, but I pivoted into startups about 5 years ago, which is actually where Dan and I met. Fell in love with the space. I fell in love with the culture of startups, and have been in the digital asset space for a little over 2 years at this point.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks again for having us on. My name is Dan Durning. I am the co-founder and CPO of Coast. My background is in risk management and product management. Previously started my career in big law, working in risk management, then moved into startups, as Rustin mentioned, about 5 years ago. Since then, worked as a product manager, focused specifically on payments products and scaling those for startups. I've been in Web3 or crypto, I would say, for about 4 years, actively working in it, though, really with the start of Coast here. So, yeah.
Cool. So I guess, to kind of start things off, I want to focus on like that period where you guys got into sort of startups and entrepreneurship, but the kind of elephant in the room, you guys are not technical co-founders, so to speak, but you have a technical product. So you want to kind of explain that a little bit, or most people usually they have like a sales focused CEO, like a Steve Jobs guy, and kind of like a Wozniak, like techie, like that's normally like the kind of matchmaking between two co-founders. But like, do you guys kind of want to explain that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So the idea of Coast came about, I guess like 18 months ago. I was sitting with a buddy in a coffee shop in Seattle, and we were just talking about the space a bit and some of the problems that we were facing on our own. And there was the problem of like, how do you pass on your digital assets whenever you die? And that problem just kind of stuck with me ever since that conversation. He's a very technical person, and he was like, yeah, I think that there's probably a great technological solution for this. It just needs to be built. And so I was just like, well, if nobody else is building a solution that is adequate, then I should build it myself. And so, yeah, I think that in today's day and age, there are more than enough tools and platforms available for people that, not being technical, for many things, especially like software, I don't think it should be an inhibitor to starting at this point. Like I think it's a bad excuse these days. So yes, no technical background, but we we're capable of learning and Googling. And yeah, that's kind of how we started.
So I guess if you just take me back, I guess, to starting Coast, how did you guys meet each other? That type of what's the backstory?
I'll let Dan carry this one.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So yeah, we actually met back in, I think it was 2018. We both had like spent 5 years of our start of our careers like working jobs we didn't love. And then, we came to this position of let's join a Y Combinator backed startup. Let's go full, all in on this and really get the full experience of what a startup is like. And yeah, we ended up being on the same team. We were both data analysts for this startup that we joined and fast friends. Like first call we had together, I feel like we were like, oh, like we just became best friends. A lot of similar interests and passions, but also just, I think at a similar point in our careers where we were kind of disillusioned with corporate life and like big corporate environments, big firms, and really looking for that like passion in life, right? And being able to wake up and do something that you actually love doing every day, whether that's by yourself or just with teams or just working on something. And I think we both caught the bug of startups where it's really like us and everyone else in this room are the only people in the world who care about what we're doing. And that energy of every day you show up because your teammates are there looking at you, they're there to support you, is something I think that we got addicted to. And fast forward a year into that startup, like they laid us all off and we had to go our separate ways. We each went to separate startups, but we remained really close friends from that. And I think, just looking back like that startup, even though as painful as it is to get laid off, is like, that's where I met my life partner. That's where I met Rustin. That's where, these really big relationships. So I think that's a core part, just having strong relationships with one another.
So just,
yeah, go.
I guess to dive a little deeper there. So I guess what you're saying is like you got sort of addicted, I guess, to that kind of startup culture. It sort of provided a canvas from which you sort of, I've noticed that as well, kind of, just, I think a lot of people, when they start thinking in a entrepreneurial sort of mindset or in that environment, a lot of relationships, good and bad, tend to form. So that's pretty interesting. So then what happened, I guess, when what happened after that? Or what was the next couple of years like?
Yeah, I left that startup. I went to a local Chicago startup. That's where I'm based out of, and was able to spend 4 years there, really just learning from two founders that were not technical themselves. They were finance professionals and then learned how to code, built a platform, hired me. I helped, led to a nice exit, got to work for the company that acquired us for a while. And Rustin, I can pass it back over to him to explain what he did after.
I went to a local startup in Oklahoma City, which is where I'm located. And I feel extremely lucky to have found that place and worked there. They're still great friends of mine, and I was able to learn a lot of the ins and outs of startups that I would not be able to get that kind of experience or exposure in a larger organization. And so that was a very formative time in my career. And I kind of learned through that what I excel at, what I'm good at. Also learned how to just build processes and learn how to scale, parts of an organization that I was in control of. So from there, I went on a deep dive into the blockchain industry. And the more and more that I researched, the more and more that I became convinced that this is a way to provide better rails for the financial system. And that was something that I felt very convicted that I wanted to be a part of. And so I left my great position at that company to go full-fledged into this industry, and then worked for a company for about a year and then started Coast.
Got it. So take me a little bit through your guys' kind of interest in the industry. I mean, like what industry do you consider yourselves in, first of all, and how did that kind of interest come about? Because I think like, most founders that I meet who start, they have like a career and then start a business, it's usually a particular interest in a certain niche. So either one of you guys want to walk me through that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So my background's kind of unique. I studied in undergrad and grad school social sciences. Like I care about society. How do we solve problems, change the world type of concepts. And For me, I always like to look at like public policy and like social just outcomes. And so like finance was really just this key thing of 76% of Americans have no financial plan whatsoever, record high credit card debt, record high, bankruptcies, just all these metrics that are really painting a horrible picture of the state of finance for consumers in America. And I think, blockchain and FinTech in general, too, traditional finance as well, really represents this opportunity to solve some of those problems or at least make them marginally better. So I come to the space really from a position of wanting to help people. And I think we're on this new frontier of Web3 and blockchain and crypto and NFTs and everything else. How can we use those tools to help people and improve society? So that's my position on it.
My degree was in finance, and I was always passionate about personal finance. I wanted to become a financial planner, started studying for my series exams, ended up leaving that due to just some, I guess, differences of opinion of some of the things that they sold. And it's always just kind of been burning in the back of my mind, but I went on to a sales career. It was much more, lucrative in my mind. It was easier, more straightforward path, whatever. Learned a lot of skills through that, but that burning desire to help people with finances has remained, which I think is why I latched onto the blockchain industry as hard as I did whenever I started uncovering more and more and doing, my own research on it. So that brought me to here.
Sort of random aside there, it was in terms of like blockchain, crypto, was that something that you were involved in like on a personal level as well, in terms of like investing and that, like you guys were pretty much like enthusiasts in this sort of space?
I feel like that's how most people start, like looking at the monetary or the investment potential of the technology. And then the more that you learn, the more that you realize, oh, there's actually something pretty significant behind this.
Nice. Cool. So you mentioned, I guess, like the financial issues that people were having post-COVID, pandemic, all that, bankruptcies. So how did that kind of lead you into the company, or what problem were you seeking to solve kind of specifically with what you guys are building?
We first attempted to solve the beneficiary problem of digital assets. Like within the digital asset space, you can have self-custody of your assets, which means that no centralized third party is managing those assets. So unlike having a bank account where you can just call the bank, they're holding your cash, and then if something were to happen to you, they pass it on to your estate. That doesn't really exist for self-custodial wallets within the digital asset space. So it's kind of like you holding digital cash in your house. If nobody knows that it's there or knows how to access it, how are they supposed to pass it on to your heirs? And so that's a massive problem. $100 billion has already been lost due to lost keys and death within the industry. And that problem will only continue to expand as the digital asset space expands. And so that was the initial problem that we attempted to solve. We ended up pivoting in the summer last year and kind of expanding our platform because we realized that digital asset beneficiary services are just kind of one facet of a much larger problem, which is kind of this financial strain that people find themselves in. Navigating life and money is hard. And it's even more overwhelming whenever you own digital assets because you have to manage all of these other things as well. And so we want to simplify that for people.
So I do want to get into the pivot and kind of just like, because that's a lot of people we talk to, there's always a pivot, almost always a pivot, 6 months or a year in. But I guess, you guys, I'm big on building businesses, right? So what are those first steps like for you guys in terms of the technology, launching it, getting it out there before you made the pivot?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we actually started building our platform using a no-code solution called Bubble. Right. So since we're not technical founders, then we needed a way to be able to actually build product and ship it without any kind of outside help. We're not like well-funded on our own. So how do we bootstrap this? And so
and just for context for people as well, Bubble is a relatively inexpensive platform if you're not using too much data. But did you figure out how to use it, I guess, on yourself? It's probably the most complicated and the most, you can develop the most on it out of the no-code platforms. There's some that are more simple and easy. Bubble's like a little harder, but you can do more with it. Did you guys figure out how to do that on your own, or did you bring anybody in?
Yeah, there's some really fantastic YouTube tutorials, and I just probably watched a couple hundred of those and just
Nice,
how do I build this little thing? Okay, let's figure that out and we'll go from there.
nice. So
Yeah,
you guys totally you were both learning it and kind of figuring out how to work it on your own.
yeah, exactly. And really just leaning into like this belief that like we can figure it out. At the end of the day, it's on us. Like if we want to build this thing, we have to figure it out. And even though technical learning can be like intimidating, it's just like ease your way into it. Talk to people who know more than you. And there's a plethora of resources, probably more accessible now to learn coding than it ever has been in history. So yeah, leaning into that learning curve and just embracing like we're going to be bad at this at the start and we're going to get better over time.
Did you? So I've been involved in a couple tech companies and like in development, like actually coding and stuff like that as well. Like, did you find any challenges in like your Scrum process or your development process? Like, oh, I can't do this feature, but it's like critical to my vision. Like, did you bump into the wall at all, or did you really have it planned out in advance? Like, okay, I know Bubble's going to cover all this, and this is how we do it.
Yeah, there was the vast majority of the application, at least V1 before Pivot, we were confident that we could build. There is a component that we were writing a smart contract. And so Dan and I were both just heads down learning Solidity, which is the programming language that is used for Ethereum. And so we were learning that because it's like, well, if we need this, so let's figure out how to do this more complex feeling piece of code and implement it into Bubble. Like the connecting to Bubble was a fairly simple, straightforward process, but we still needed to learn Solidity to be able to write the smart contract. And then we needed to have it audited because you're dealing with people's estates. And so there were security concerns that we had within the code. So we connected with some great auditors. We're on that path. And then, yeah, we decided at, I guess, midsummer to completely pivot. And that kind of changed things quite a bit.
Got it. So are you running into it like in these kind of early stages after the development's complete? Like how much legal work are you doing around like the estate planning? Like is there a lot of kind of overhead associated with that, or is that stuff that you could also? Because I imagine that's one of the challenges of like building a company in the tech space in general. Is there's just like there's more regulations than if you're doing like a marketing company or something.
We're grateful to have great attorneys, that's for sure. Since the pivot, that's no longer as much of a concern yet, unless we implement, another solution in the future for beneficiary services.
Right.
Our platform today doesn't have those same requirements and doesn't have the same, I guess, risk associated with it. So yeah, it's not a huge concern of ours, but yeah, we have some great attorneys.
Got it. So I guess transitioning into like what is marketing and kind of after after you put the product out, what does kind of like marketing and sales look like for you guys?
We launched our MVP of the product that we're calling Canvas back in end of November, beginning of December. And so we've been in closed beta since. So yeah, the majority of the, I guess, user acquisition work that we're doing is people that we know, communities that we're involved in, acquaintances of other people who might be great users to test the product.
Got it.
Since we are still dealing with financial data, we want to make sure that the platform is stable. And so, yeah, it's just been a matter of who can we find to beta test it.
Got it. So I think I phrased that question wrong, but how have you been thinking about the marketing? So you mentioned like the initially like this kind of like macro economic US in sort of crisis philosophy, but then obviously you did this pivot. So I guess my question there is sort of how are you just thinking about the marketing? Like what are you in an ideal world, what's the message that you're putting out and how are you leading people into early adoption?
The thing that hasn't really changed is that people care a lot about their financial stability.
Nice.
Like it's one component of people's lives that just persistently is just difficult, overwhelming. And so helping people feel heard, I think, is a really, really important part of our message. It's kind of how we defined our narrative. It's how we think about like what does the end user feel in approaching like a message like ours. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into this. We could probably talk about narrative for 20 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, do you just like being heavily involved in this? Like, what do you see as like what's the biggest problem that society, or at least your audience as a whole, is facing? Is it, just like general, familiarity with personal financial stuff, budgeting, that type of thing, or something related to like, you know, a larger, like how do you see the kind of big problem for people who are trying to like innovate and solve?
There are a couple. So one of the trends that we see is that there's kind of an underlying trend of people wanting to do it themselves. Like, I want to learn this. I'm interested in investing. I'm interested in markets. I want to learn how to trade or invest and manage my wealth on my own. There's also this trend of people who need help, but they don't really know where to turn. And even though there's more access to financial information and learning online than has ever existed before, it's still really cumbersome and overwhelming for a lot of people to digest. Like, there's just so much. And so it's just like, how do you package up information, just the amount of information that a user needs at that exact moment in time that they need it? And I think that that's been kind of like a problem that hasn't been solved yet. The other aspect of that is that financial planners are great. There are some really great people who are helping people. Many of those are financially, I guess, out of bounds for many people. Like, if someone doesn't have a high net worth, then they may not have enough assets for them to feel like it's worth getting a financial planner. Or perhaps the financial planner is, $3,000 a year. The people who need the help the most are typically kind of priced out of those markets or that access or that help, I guess I should say.
Yeah, just to add to that, I would say too, financial planning means something different to everyone. That's something we've noticed. Financial planners consider it this big goal-based, timeline-based document and process, versus consumers often think like, oh, I have a budget. I spend $100 on groceries every 2 days or something. It can mean so many different things to so many different people, which I think is really just indicative of like lack of education and just a cohesive narrative around what this means. So I think that's part of our platform too, is really thinking about how do we make sure people feel confident in decisions, and also that they're covering all their bases, that this is comprehensive for them in an accessible way that isn't over their heads or makes them feel dumb or anything like that.
Gotcha. So you just kind of have to be careful about that tone, I guess, in your messaging in general, just knowing people are going to take it in that way. That makes
Totally.
sense. How are you guys in terms of, I mentioned at the beginning, sort of the whole solopreneur co-founder thing. How are you guys, what are your different roles? How are you sort of working together as a team? What does the team look like in general? I'm just curious kind of how you're working together.
Yeah, really good question. So we're not technical, but we do have to do technical things every single day. So Rustin really has, I would say, taken the lead on being our like head programmer, head developer. He codes all day, and I, from the product management side and sort of the Scrum side of things, help roadmap, discover, scope all of these different features and things like that. And I also try to handle a lot of just the day-to-day business. So whether it's marketing or partnerships or things like that, to try to free Rustin's brain up to be able to focus on actually coding. And this sort of goes back to my product manager roles that I've had in the past, but developers should develop and get to talk to product managers. They shouldn't have to like take on a bunch of other tasks that other people could be doing. So with just two of us, it kind of divides up like that.
Yeah, that sounds pretty fair. And then how do you foresee that changing as time goes on, or are these pretty much like the fixed roles that you kind of want to operate in?
Yeah, eventually we will probably stabilize into more traditional roles here, but for now, this is what works and this is what we need to do, at least until we hit the next couple of milestones.
Nice. And did you like, was that similar to what was your working relationship at your old company?
We
Was
were
it similar anyway or no?
We were just peers working on the same team. And so we would chat about problems that we were having or, questions that we had for each other. But yeah, very much, yeah, I don't know. It was just a traditional like co-working relationship, I guess.
Cool. So a big issue in sort of companies in like a similar stage to you guys, with you guys also being the personal finance guys as well, is fundraising and the actual like financial commitments of building a company. How have you guys kind of been managing or approaching that? Like, are you thinking about raising money? Have you thought about it? Like, what's the overall perspective?
Good question. So last year, whenever we were working on the beneficiary products, we were trying to fundraise. And it was apparently the worst fundraising environment for early stage startups in the blockchain space for like, 10 years. And so, yeah, it was very challenging. We learned a ton. We've started building really great relationships with VCs and angel investors that we are still talking to this day. And so we think that now that we're at a place where we have product and market, it might make sense for us to
Nice.
continue raising capital. But yeah, we take that day by day. We're building relationships and making sure that the fundraising component isn't taking away from actually doing the thing that we want to provide to the market.
Cool. So you're building those relationships, nurturing them, and kind of waiting for the time to do it. But I even further on that, like, or do you see like the growth of the company requiring like a huge capital commitment? You know what I'm saying? Like, are you thinking about, oh, we're gonna put all this money into advertising or hire a bunch of people? You know what I'm saying? Like, or do you see it as like more of a stacking it sort of brick by brick type approach?
Either. So we're building regardless of whether we have capital or not.
Got it.
And I think that puts us in a unique position because we're not dependent on capital in order to make this thing work. That said, capital definitely accelerates the roadmap, but it doesn't necessarily accelerate like the testing that we've had to conduct over the past 3, 4, or 5 months. Like a lot of that has just been heads down building. And so from that perspective, like fundraising wouldn't have been beneficial to us because we still had to do all of the validation of our customers and we still had to build the product. We still had to test the product. We still had to iterate on the product. All of that stuff doesn't really benefit from having excess capital. Once you have the product in the market and are seeing signs of product market fit, that's when we think that really adds fuel to the fire, not necessarily provides a match to light the fire, if that makes sense.
So don't look at it as a match, but more as fuel, I guess, is what you're communicating there.
Yep. And those conversations are much easier once you have validation. We've spoken to hundreds of customers at this point. Like we have actual users using the product. Those conversations are much easier whenever you have stats and real people and real stories to be able to back up why what you're building is actually beneficial and necessary in the market.
Cool. So, and do you see like bubble, like do you see yourself moving off bubble in the future for the product, or is that something you think can work at scale?
Eventually, I think that we probably would. I really believe that it can take us very far though. And so for us, it's the fastest way to be able to construct an application, iterate on it, while keeping our costs extremely low.
Got it. So you mentioned the whole users on the product. How are you approaching like taking user feedback? Maybe this is a question for Dan, but just like, how are you collecting user feedback? Like what does that feedback look like and how are you kind of acting on it?
Yeah, really great question. I think this is like the bread and butter of early stage startups. Like you need to not guess at what your customers need. As Rustin and I always say, it's like guessing is expensive. And so you really need to listen to your customers, whether that's before we actually shipped our product, our MVP, we had over 100 customer conversations, people in TradFi, people in DeFi, people in both. Talk to everyone you can, get as much feedback as you can. Since launching the MVP, we do ask for a survey as a part of completing the beta test. 6 questions, super easy, takes less than 2 minutes. But did you like it? Would you pay for it? Would you be disappointed if you couldn't use it anymore? What would you like to see in the product? And we've just gotten such enthusiasm where folks are like, this was really cool. I want this. I would love to do this. This would 10x the experience. And, as a product manager, like part of your life is just like intaking a ton of feedback and then prioritizing it. Like, does this actually give value, and how hard is it to build? And how quickly can we do that? So I think a lot of it has just been like prioritization of the feedback and the feature requests. But we've already thought, we shipped actually last Monday V2 of the app, and it's significantly better. And we just want to continue that cadence as much as possible every month.
Dan, are you using any type of like tools in your stack, like for the feedback, or this, you're talking about like the auto surveys and stuff that make kind of your life easier? Like, what is there anything in particular you would recommend to people?
I say go simple. Simple first.
Paper?
Well, yeah, we use Google Forms. Like, we already have a Google suite of products. Might as well use what we have access to. And it's also just trying to be lean as possible right now. But yeah, Google surveys, even just taking notes, having live calls with folks, so forth. Eventually we'll get to Jira or something like that, but for now we're just using basic things.
Got it. So what kind of challenges are you guys facing right now? Like, what's the, I don't know, Russ, if you want to talk about that, but like, what's the sort of biggest thing in that's in your face that's kind of causing you concern right now?
I think it's more internal than external. More like I want to see the pace of iteration continue to be fast. And so it's been painful over the past 2 months to have to say no to opportunities or have to become extremely strict about my schedule, my calendar, what calls that I take with people. I think that's been the biggest challenge, is remaining focused, because like we do believe that we're onto something. We are seeing signals from the market that we're building something genuinely interesting. And so with that comes a lot of opportunity and conversations that we could be having, but are they the best use of the time right now? And I think that that's been kind of the biggest challenge, is like saying no to opportunity, saying no to, I'm not going to take that call. Dan's going to take that call. I'm going to bounce from it. Yeah. How do we stay focused? How do you continue building for the end user? How do you keep that cadence up? How do you communicate to people that you're listening and that you're shipping the things that they're asking for? Yeah, for me, I think that's been the biggest challenge.
Got it. So I guess you guys are kind of coming to that point where prioritization, at least for the two of you in terms of your time, is you have like a lot of stuff to do, and obviously like a lot of stuff is coming in, but it's just kind of determining like what is actually the most important for progress at this point.
Yep.
And like in the beginning, you're trying to figure out like what is that I do when you have all this time to like focus on development or research or whatever it may be. And now it's just like, yeah, like, if I took these like 10 customer feedback calls or whatever calls that may not, that might be good for us, but don't really lead to that next iteration, that could be like a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks gone. So I think that's a common issue that people kind of have. So that's kind of interesting.
Whenever you're first starting a company, you're trying to figure out what direction do you go.
Right.
And a lot of times it feels like you're wandering in the desert for a very long time until you find the path. And it was really, I guess December or January of this year that we found the path that we want to take. And now it's really a matter of prioritization and focus.
Yeah. Yeah. There's almost a FOMO in a certain extent when you get to that kind of stage, because you're just, you're thinking about all these things that could be opportunities, or could be these like exciting, like, and you're sort of projecting it in like 3 years, this connection might be, the person, but then, like really what you have to focus on is, the product or whatever that next step is, sales. But then you also don't want to miss out on what could potentially be like big opportunities. So I don't know. I haven't really found like the balance as to that, but yeah, I would say that like generally, pushing forward with the more of the drudgery, you know what I'm saying, and scheduling out more of that is probably the right move. But you also don't want to be the one to like miss out on some big opportunities. So it's kind of like a discernment problem. But okay, cool. So what do you see, like, just like being involved in like the financial space, crypto, what's like the next big trend or thing that's going on that people should be aware of, or maybe they can capitalize and take advantage of?
Just within the industry as a whole?
Yeah, the industry as a whole, or just in crypto, or.
Sure. Yeah, the blockchain industry is very interesting. There's quite a few narratives there are quite a few really intelligent people who are working on really hard problems. Like, how do you tokenize real world assets? Like, take title for mortgages, for example. You have to go through this long process and spend $3,000 to $6,000 for a company to do a bunch of research and tell you, yes, you can own this home. Let's transfer the title over to this other person or whatever. We believe that blockchain can solve a lot of the bloat that's kind of surrounding transactions like that, which puts more dollars into purchasers' pockets. Like, everyone wins in that situation. The buyer, the seller, they both win. The speed of finalization of that transaction increases. And so just like the velocity of capital moves faster with blockchain rails in that instance. And so we see these like little that's just one example of dozens that are happening within the blockchain industry. And it's one of those things that the industry has been kind of tainted by some bad actors. You have human beings in every single industry. And it just so happens that financially incentivized industries typically draw out some of the worst people. And so I think the industry as a whole has kind of struggled with that narrative over the past couple of years. And I don't think that will persist forever. There will be legislature that comes down to, give more guidance within that.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. Like, to even just play devil's advocate a little bit, it's kind of like there has been like a lot of bad press, and I just remember like 5 years ago or whatever, in 19, I guess that was 5 years ago, I did like it was like crypto week or something in New York City or something along those lines, and there was like a ton of like different meetups and networking events, and I was trying to capitalize on this for my marketing agency. So I'm like, I get some like PR speakers, future blockchain, and everybody's coming in how like the blockchain is going to revolutionize this. And then, I kind of slept on it, whatever everybody's like trading, the tokens and whatnot. But then it's kind of like, now it's kind of resurging, and it's gone up and down. Not just I'm talking about the interest in it, not like any individual Bitcoin price or anything. But yeah, it's kind of interesting just like how that's going to, what's going to happen. Is it going to be like kind of institutionalized at the end of the day? Because that's kind of what the press was. But I don't know. Yeah, it's just like one of those things where I think that's a challenge for you guys. But obviously there's multiple different angles.
I think that now is actually the best time to be interested in looking into blockchain because it's maturing. The Bitcoin ETF was just approved last month, which is a very significant event for the industry, probably the most important event to have occurred since the Bitcoin white paper. And so as we continue to see the industry maturing, then there will be more applications like ours that are building within blockchain that you don't even necessarily know that they're building within blockchain. Like, someone who has no interest in blockchain technology can use and benefit from our product. And we think that that's kind of like an interesting proposal, that there are all of these applications that have been building over the past couple of years that are now shipping product this year. And that's a really, really exciting proposition.
Cool. Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. It's just like, the maturing, and it almost seems like it's better for the industry in general than like I'm gonna miss out on, what I'm saying, kind of energy that was like beforehand. But I guess on a broader scope, and kind of to wrap things up, like can you give people, especially the entrepreneur, kind of starting entrepreneur audience, like what's your number one financial advice or personal financial advice, given that you guys are the gurus of this?
We don't provide financial advice. Yeah, that's something that's a question that I probably can't answer.
Got it. Okay. Or not even like financial. I mean, that sounds like I'm asking you to like endorse something to invest in.
Yeah, we don't do that.
What more about? I'm talking about more about like just like guidance. You know what I'm saying? Like it's important to save. You know what I'm saying? Like, what if as an entrepreneur, how do you kind of think about personal finance?
I think it's just important to care. Like, whether you are managing your assets or you're having someone else manage your assets, you still need to understand, or at least try to understand. There are plenty of people out there that don't care about the intricacies of personal finances. They don't care about all of the investments and things like that. There are people like us who are nerds and make Excel spreadsheets, and we love tracking all of that stuff. but we don't think that we're the majority here.
Got
And
it.
so I guess my advice would just be just because someone else is managing your assets does not mean that you should be blind to what's occurring there.
Got it. Dan, anything to add there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say just practically as a builder, like I knew 5 years ago I wanted to eventually go build a startup. So I started saving 5 years ago to go build that startup eventually. So
Yeah.
just in a very practical sense, if you know you have a dream to go be an entrepreneur someday and build a startup, you need to start preparing for that today. And the sooner, the better. So that way you have the reserves to navigate, maybe
Yeah.
not taking a salary for several months. So
I think doing that also just multiplies your chances for success. You know, it doesn't make it guaranteed, but much more than somebody who's just like spur of the moment deciding, oh, I'm going to go do this. It keeps you prepared for that. You know, when you guys have the spark, as to, so to speak, and you took the jump. Rustin, Dan, where can people find you? What's the best way for customers if they want to sign up to get started with Coast?
As far as Coast is concerned, just go to getcoast.io. And that's where you can find us and our products. If you're looking to get in touch with me, I'm pretty much everywhere. LinkedIn, X, Discord, Telegram, send me a smoke signal, I guess, if you need to.
Nice.
But yeah, you can find me on all of those platforms.
yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Dan-Durning, and Telegram, Dan_Durning. And yeah, Get Coast, we would love more beta users. So please go to getcoast.io and sign up.
Cool. Yeah, and if you guys are open to it, we're doing a Discord with the kind of the one network, so it might be cool to do like a channel focused on blockchain or something. Maybe you guys can network with some other people in there, give them some mentorship, or maybe even on the bubble stuff. But cool, great having you guys on. Thanks for coming, and this is it.
Sometimes we cry, sometimes we let it out. Sometimes we laugh, oh yeah, we work it out. But when we fight, I'll break you down.